Welcome everyone to the 2021 Barbara Dicker Oration. My name's Professor Susan Rossell. I'm a cognitive neuropsychologist and an NHMRC Senior Research Fellow at Swinburne Centre for Mental Health, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Professor Pascal Cuesta, to formally welcome you to the event.
Well, thank you, Susan. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodian on the land on which I stand today, but also on which Swinburne's Melbourne campuses are located. I pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I also respectfully acknowledge all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff, students, alumni, partners, and guests. And I also acknowledge and respect the traditional owners of lands across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures, and heritage, and recognize the continuing sovereignties of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Welcome everyone to today's special event. I would like to make a particular special welcome to members of the Dicker family who are here with us today, whose dedicated support has helped make many advances in mental health research undertaken at Swinburne. Thank you for your past and ongoing support for our research efforts in depression and related mental health conditions, sleep disorders, and dementia. It is with sadness that I also acknowledge the recent passing of Beverly Dicker. To all the family with us today, I pay you my deepest condolences. It is with great pleasure to be here today speaking at this event 10 years after Ian Dicker and his family decided to honor Barbara Dicker's memory with the creation of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. We feel honored at Swinburne that you chose us to steward this important work and that you continue to work in partnership with us now and in the future to make a difference in the study of brain and psychological sciences. During the 10 years of the foundation, there has been some significant findings in the well-being of people affected by neurological and psychological disorders. You have made a strong impact on Swinburne's research capability in this very rapidly developing field. The Foundation's seed grants for our early career researchers have helped boost a growing cohort of emerging research careers undertaking critical research into sleep, dementia, and mental health. Thanks to the Dicker family funding, Swinburne now has a great depth of talent and expertise. We are fortunate that the Foundation's work is being led so capably under Tony Dicker's chairmanship, along with the support of your family members, Craig and Jennifer, on the board. And we are thrilled to learn that Ian's grandchildren are now also taking an active role in the Foundation. What a wonderful thing your family is doing. We are grateful that our partnership will continue, at least through to 2025, on the back of the Dicker's family pledge to extend the funding arrangement between the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation and Swinburne. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. It is true that when it comes to psychological and neurological sciences, technology can only be half of the solution. At Swinburne, our focus on technology is based on our capacity to enable social, environmental, economic, and cultural good. When industry and community partners turn to universities for solution and future innovation, they also seek the human capital and talent that is required to help drive their knowledge outcomes. Swinburne's partnership with the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation allows us to bring together pure researchers with technology to deliver at scale and apply the latest technologies to mental health research using data analysis, neuroimaging, and telehealth. Researchers recipients of Barbara Dicker funding from the early years have now reached positions of seniority in research and have played key leadership roles during the COVID-19 pandemic. We will hear more later today about Dr. Michelle Lim's focus on loneliness and also Professor Susan Rossell's work in helping to understand more about the mental health impacts of COVID-19. In leading the Social Health and Wellbeing Laboratory, Dr. Lim has helped bring a dark subject out of the shadows, highlighting the tremendous challenges we face as a society in dealing with this loneliness epidemic. We will hear also from Associate Professor Neil Thomas, who is the Deputy Director of Swinburne's Centre for Mental Health, and also Professor James Ogloff, who is the Director of Swinburne's Centre for Forensic Behavioural Science. With both Neil and James' extensive bodies of work, we can see the role Swinburne is playing in helping to shape the mental health reforms we so desperately need in Australia. Without Neil's work in treatment research and his continued advocacy for telehealth and other digital technologies, introducing these so quickly when it was so urgently required would simply not have been possible. As we're seeing in Victoria right now, the mental health care system is on the cusp of being transformed if we can successfully implement a comprehensive set of Royal Commission recommendations to fix a broken system. We will hear from James about this and the critical shortages facing the mental health workforce. As a founder of Swinburne's graduate program in forensic mental health and behavioral science, which now has more than 160 students enrolled each semester, there is no one more qualified than James to speak about the problems we are facing with our mental health workforce and ideas on how to address them. Many of the problems affecting people experiencing acute mental health disorders and the barriers they face to receive effective treatment are known, but there's still so much more to uncover. We still have a very long way to go. Swinburne's research programs are needed just as desperately now as they were 10 years ago, and we look forward to the ongoing partnership with the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation to keep turning research ideas into real-life treatment options for the 1 in 5 adults affected by adverse mental health problems every year. This essential research cannot be done without the incredible philanthropic support of our Swinburne community. My ask of you all as you participate in today's discussion is to consider the Dickers family important lead in that area. My ask is to consider the ways in which you and your family may invest to help bring Swinburne's vision of bringing people and technology together to build a better world a reality. I would now like to welcome Dr. Tony Dicker, Chair of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, and hand the virtual proceedings over to him. Thank you, Tony, and thank you so much to the Dicker family for your ongoing support.
Thank you, Pascal, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your interest in this oration. My name is Dr. Tony Dicker, and I'm the Chair of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. Our family is very grateful that Swinburne University named this oration in honour of our mother. The foundation is different to that described by the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov and the recent Apple TV version of his Foundation series books. Rather than psychohistory, our foundation is focused on the future, psychology research, particularly in the areas of sleep, depression and dementia. The family members aren't psychologists, and apart from myself, we do not play any particular role in research or education. If anything, we are education consumers, something that is strongly encouraged within the family and also for the staff within our businesses. But as a family, and particularly driven by my father, Ian, we're looking for a way to help, to contribute. This has led to a beautiful relationship with Swinburne through philanthropy. For those of you who have been financially successful in your journey, we can highly recommend the personal satisfaction obtained by this type of relationship with the university. Our relationship could now be classified as long-term. We've passed the 10-year mark of our association with Swinburne, and this afternoon, in some ways, is a reflection of that time. Some of the speakers today were starting their careers back then and obtaining seeding funding from their early projects. It is so wonderful to see their hard work evolve into what we're hearing about today. But enough from me. I'll hand you back to our host, Susan, and the team so we can get to the important things, our Swinburne experts who can enlighten you on what is happening in their fields of study. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm very proud to be moderating the Barbara Dicker Oration today on its 10-year anniversary. I've been working with the Dicker family from the inception of their foundation, a role that has been both a privilege and a pleasure. I cannot overstate the world-leading mental health research that emerges from Swinburne, many of our projects over the last 10 years being seed funding by the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation. Swinburne's mental health researchers are internationally renowned for their pioneering work in improving the diagnosis and treatment of chronic mental health conditions, as well as within forensic mental health. The last 18 months to 2 years have certainly been challenging for many people in the general public, with prevalence rates for mental health disorders significantly increased and the obvious flow-on effects, including an increased demand for mental health services. In preparation for today's oration, I noticed in September of this year that the World Economic Forum published an article in Scientific American about the top 6 innovations in mental health. These 6 innovations highlighting exciting developments for those with devastating effects of chronic mental health disorders. I was so pleased to note that researchers at Swinburne are involved in each of these 6 innovations in our current portfolio of work. I'll touch briefly on each of these 6 innovations for the audience. So the first innovation, novel treatments for treatment-resistant depression. This includes psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. I'm leading a team here at Swinburne that is conducting the first such trial in Australia. We hope to build on the treatment strides for those with depression that have been made internationally with this approach for the study. The second innovation, data from social media and online resources spotting mental health trends. At the beginning of the pandemic, it became very obvious to many of us that there were going to be significant mental health challenges as a result of the pandemic stresses, including extended lockdowns and fears around an infection. My team here at Swinburne set up the Collate project to monitor these mental health trends, and I'm sure many of you are actually fed up with seeing me on the TV talking about the findings of Collate. Anyway, but for those of you that haven't yet had the opportunity to hear me speak, it will be of no surprise to any of you that we're not doing very well. Stress, anxiety and depression rose to 3 times pre-pandemic levels in April last year, with recent data in August of this year suggesting that it's now 6 times pre-pandemic levels, with flow-on effects to suicidal ideation and a number of mental health challenges. Online resources and social media were incredibly important in collecting and continuing to collect this critical information. The third innovation was predictive analytics to guide diagnostics and treatment options. What does that mean? Okay, so we have a number of pioneering projects in this space run by our researchers here at Swinburne. There are many I could tell you about, but I'll just touch on 3 for you today. Dr. Eric Tan has an NHMRC fellowship examining the speech of patients with schizophrenia with a machine learning approach to help with diagnostics and help recognise relapse in this condition. Secondly, we have Professor Denny Meyer using big data approaches to help with suicide prediction of individuals presenting themselves to GPs and helplines. And finally, we have Dr. Andrea Philippou, who's uncovered a novel biomarker for anorexia using eye movements. What is this, a biomarker? Well, it's a specific small eye movement that she discovered that can help diagnose people with anorexia. This eye movement is only found in those with anorexia, not with other people in the general public. What about the fourth innovation? So this is digital markets, including apps to ensure quality mental health solutions. Apps are playing an important role in ensuring people have access to mental health solutions at home and everywhere we go. In this space, we partnered with the Butterfly Foundation, a support service for those with eating disorders, as well as other academics across Melbourne to produce the world's first chatbot for eating disorders. This chatbot helps people in crisis. I know that Dr. Lim will be highlighting another such app to alleviate loneliness in her presentation. So I'll move on to the fifth innovation. Online telehealth, digital care and device options. I understand that many of you, your friends and your family will have tried to seek help for mental health problems over the last year. And you'll be really well aware of how long it takes to see a trained psychologist or psychiatrist. This is a systemic work issue that Swinburne is seeking to solve through training the next generation of mental health professions. In the meantime, the best way to deliver mental health services at scale across our vast country is through innovations, advances in online telehealth, digital care and device options. Later on, I'll have the pleasure of introducing Associate Professor Neil Thomas, who will tell you more about our work in this field. The sixth and final innovation is new workforce models. As we move forward with a system that the Royal Health Commission claimed was broken, and a heightened need as a result of the COVID pandemic to think of new ways of working in mental health, Swinburne was extremely fortunate to have one of our professors, Professor James Ogloff, on the Royal Commission Task Force. It'd be a great honour for me to introduce him here later to talk about system changes that are proposed in the mental health space. And with that, I'll wrap up my introduction. The challenges posed by mental health conditions in Australia require some of the best to come together. It's my great pleasure tonight to showcase some of the ways in which Swinburne is committed to making a difference. It's now time to introduce our three speakers. Dr. Michelle Lim is a senior lecturer in clinical psychology. She's the scientific chair and chairperson of Ending Loneliness Together, a national initiative which guides Australian charities, government agencies and not-for-profit organisations to deliver solutions for loneliness. Associate Professor Neil Thomas is the Deputy Director of the Centre for Mental Health and the Director of the National Eat Therapy Centre, and the Director for the Voices Clinic. He is pioneering digital treatments for those with chronic mental health conditions. Professor James Ogloff AM is a University Distinguished Professor of Forensic Behavioural Science and the Director of the Centre for Forensic Behavioural Science at Swinburne. He's also the Executive Director of the Psychological Services and Research at Forensic Care. For more than 35 years, Professor Ogloff has played an integral role in identifying, advocating for and improving the care of people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. Now, my very great pleasure to throw the floor over to Michelle, who's going to tell us about loneliness and her research in the field. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, Susan, and thank you to the Barbara Dicker Oration Committee. I'm going to start off with a general view of what has happened since COVID. So loneliness and social isolation has been really highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially when most of us have had to live and still currently living under significant social restrictions. In our studies, we've done two studies during COVID, and the first study is a global study on looking at how the severity of social restrictions impacted on our loneliness and mental health. And in this study of 3,000 people worldwide, we found that social restriction severity actually had an impact on both loneliness and mental health. So what we found was that as social restrictions eased, loneliness reduced, depression remained unchanged, and social anxiety symptoms actually increased. So in terms of the implications of what this actually means, especially as our communities move towards recovering from COVID and actually having to now reintegrate and actually live with lower levels of restrictions, we do know that there may be very much implications around the mental health services. So mental health practitioners may actually see an increase in social anxiety symptoms, that people are more reluctant to actually try to reintegrate within their regular social networks. And this is actually quite surprising to us, but is very much consistent with what we do see in social anxiety. So people with higher levels of social anxiety tend to avoid more social interactions and actually are more prone to feeling distressed when they actually are in those interactions. So the fact that our social restrictions are easing doesn't mean that this particular group actually does better. In fact, it actually means that they are going to experience more distress. So that's one study that we did during COVID. The second study that we did during COVID was that we ran an international randomized controlled trial in the UK, the USA, and Australia. And we looked at the impact of kindness, and social isolation in 3 large online communities. So this is a total across the 3 countries of 4,500 participants. And we actually had a waitlist group and a treatment group. And what we found was that participants who did at least 2.5 acts of kindness during this time, during COVID, actually reported lower levels of loneliness and social isolation in the US community sample. In the US community sample, they also found significant lower levels of social anxiety and fewer neighborhood concerns. In the UK, we found significant reductions in loneliness and lower neighborhood concerns. And in Australia's sample, we found that those who actually were enrolled in the treatment trial actually reduced lower levels of stress. And an important thing to really note is that, we these acts of kindness were not something that we need to teach them. This is very much part and parcel of most people's repertoire of pro-social behaviors. And I think it's got really huge implications to low and middle income countries that may not have skilled practitioners on the ground to actually reduce loneliness, social isolation, or stress. That actually those sorts of very small, low cost, no cost type of acts can actually reduce loneliness and social isolation, which is pretty amazing. And during COVID as well, as you imagine, there's been a lot of interest in loneliness and social isolation. So in addition to the Ending Loneliness movement, we launched the white paper late last year, and also launched the Parliamentary Friends of Ending Loneliness together with federal members of parliament, Mr. Andrew Giles and Dr. Fiona Martin. In addition to that, we also launched the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, which is now going to be headquartered in Washington, D.C. as a nonprofit organization and has an emerging partnership with the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization has also released an advocacy brief on loneliness and social isolation in older adults, and they are expanding their work across the lifespan. And last, the EU Commission Vice President has also released a report on loneliness in the EU. And there's a lot of energy and synergy around what the World Health Organization wants to do and what the EU wants to do. And so these groups are all kind of coming together to actually try to understand what we can do globally. So loneliness is an issue that's really emerging, not just within Australia, but across the world. And with the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, we now have 10 countries channeling into this network. So there's a lot to do in this space, and there's a lot of movement, especially when the World Health Organization will release those guidelines on loneliness and social isolation in 2 years. So I'm really excited to be part of this group, but also to kind of make a difference, not just within Australia, but globally. And that loneliness itself has been clearly demonstrated as an antecedent to poorer mental health, but yet is rarely targeted and rarely addressed. And I think that the global recognition of its impact, it's really crucial to us kind of moving our advocacy within Australia.
Thank you, Michelle, for such an interesting summary of the work that you've been doing and the important role that Swinburne's playing in these international efforts to understand loneliness. I just had a quick question to follow up from that. Could you touch on, for the audience, some of the work that you've been doing in terms of interventions for loneliness?
Yeah, so in terms of interventions for loneliness, I have two pieces of work. First, we've just completed a large meta-analysis of 125 studies around the world, including the ones that are not in English. So we have them translated from Dutch with our team and our collaboration with Denmark researchers and in the UK. And what we found in these meta-analyses was that most interventions do make a difference with loneliness and social isolations, but the ones that are probably of higher quality are the ones that have a slight psychological approach. So that means that if it actually has some sort of angle around CBT, mindfulness, or strengths-based type approaches. So while most things worked, the ones that are of high quality are the ones that have a psychological angle. And the second intervention work that I've completed is a randomized controlled trial of students, university students, looking at a digital intervention to reduce loneliness in university students who are lonely, and that trial has just finished. So there's a couple of things in terms of solutions, but what we do know with the solutions are currently being so-called administered within our community for loneliness and social isolation is that many of those solutions are likely to kind of make a difference with social isolation, but not loneliness. So an example would be the social prescribing movement that's really being advocated now as something to reduce loneliness and social isolation. But I think there's a lot more work for us to kind of consider what the real impact is on loneliness, because we do know it does reduce social isolation, but what for us to really make a difference with loneliness is really about focusing on the quality of the interactions as opposed to the quantity.
Thank you, Michelle, for that lovely answer. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move over to our next speaker. My great pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Neil Thomas, who I've worked with for many years now. Neil's going to speak to us today about the importance of flexible delivery of psychological interventions, especially using digital technologies. Neil, can you tell us how these have changed our world over the last few years, please?
Thanks, Susan, and good to be here. Thank you to the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation for this event. The past couple of years have been incredibly important in terms of digital mental health coming to the fore. There's been a couple of big influences on that. So obviously the pandemic has come with it an increased uptake of the use of remote forms of communication. So what we've seen is that mental health services have had a rapid uptake of telehealth as a mode of provision. And this has also helped to break through some of the challenges that services have had in integrating digital technology with provision. There's been a number of barriers. I think people have been tuned into the risks of doing things differently. So there's been a reticence amongst both practitioners and hospital-based services, which has been overcome by the pandemic because out of necessity, digital technology has been implemented. Alongside that, we've also had important reviews such as the Productivity Commission report, the Royal Commission that Jim will be talking about as well, that have been looking at the ways in which we deliver mental health services, which has really been highlighting the potential that digital mental health may have for improving accessibility. So I can talk to a couple of big areas in relation to this. So one is around the use of telehealth, and one is around how we can utilize technology to enhance the therapeutic process. So with telehealth, so what we mean by that is using digital technology to mediate communication between a practitioner and a service user. So as we know, there's been a big service shift, and that video conferencing, and so it would include telephone as well. We also use text chat as a modality in the service that we run, Mental Health Online. So there's been an uptake in those forms of technology. Now, during the pandemic, we've been involved in leading advising some of the implementations in this space. And part of that work has been doing a really systematic review of the whole literature that we have on what it's like to deliver psychological therapies via telehealth, via video conferencing in particular, and looking at how that compares with the usual face-to-face provision. So that work has been incredibly interesting in identifying the key measures that we might want to be looking at, such as the therapeutic alliance, the amount of rapport that clients feel that they have with their therapist, the clinical outcomes, the amount of satisfaction that people experience from therapy. These all seem to be equivalent between the in-person traditional mode of therapy delivery and delivery over telehealth. So on average, people are rating those things the same. Now, we know that there's some differences with that. We know that practitioners, and myself included, can find it challenging to be not have all of those cues in the room for helping people. And also that some individuals may have preferences for one or the other. But this is kind of highlighting that there are many people for whom telehealth can actually be preferable, can increase accessibility, can be lower cost, can fit in with people's lives more easily. So there's some important implications of being able to keep this as a mode of reaching people and delivering services. Now, this relates to one of the issues that's been highlighted in these recent reviews of mental health service delivery, which is about the geographic maldistribution of therapy and service availability in mental health. So we have poorer access in more obviously rural regional areas, but as well as that also in less wealthy areas within metropolitan regions as well. So it's harder to find services. And so there's obviously an opportunity for us to move beyond the traditional model which we've had, which has been like a general practice model in which there is a practitioner within a particular geographic neighbourhood providing services in a more generic way, into opening the door for more specialist forms of provision. So a couple of examples of what we've been doing at Swinburne are Voices clinics. So we run a clinic which helps people with intrusive auditory experiences, which is not an uncommon experience, but fairly specialist in terms of people's knowledge about how to deliver that. So our Voices clinic, which has got some particular expertise in that, has been able to transition from offering services locally to offering them across the whole country, and being able to reach people who otherwise would not have access to that type of specialist support. Another implication has been the aged care clinic, which Swinburne runs, which Professor Sunil Barr runs, which has been able to do outreach into residential aged care at an important time during the pandemic when people have been particularly isolated. So we've been able to have that more specialist delivery, and that's something that we would hope to continue. However, thinking about where this can develop further, what has come through has been, particularly from our consultations with services and research we've done trying to find out about people's experiences of service delivery, has been that rather than us looking at there being this separation between there being telehealth based services and there being sort of like face-to-face in-person services, that actually these represent different channels of communication, much like we would do with our friends, family members. We would be communicating with people, one day we're on WhatsApp, and one day we might be emailing somebody, another day we're having one of our picnics in the park to connect with people. So that similarly within services, we're moving beyond this model which is focused on in-person provision being primary and everything else being a second cousin, to there being multiple ways of interacting with people. And so one of the things that we're keen to see development of further has been bouncing off our experience with Mental Health Online. So so Mental Health Online is a service which provides self-guided materials for supporting people with their mental health, in addition to providing therapist support in real time. So we've used a combination of both those materials that someone can use on their own with therapy provision on time, in real time, using video conferencing, text chat, email, and so on. And so what we're seeing with that is the potential to be giving people choices about the different modes of interaction that they would prefer. And certainly important things that we've heard from that have been that not everybody would see having a traditional face-to-face video or in-person interaction as being the preferred option, that people very much would like to have things that they're doing themselves with self-guided materials, or if they're having interaction with people, for that to be using different forms of communication. Sometimes people can find it too overwhelming to be on video during an interaction, and would prefer to have slightly less intrusive, under the spotlight type interactions when they're forming the engagement. So we've got potential for much greater flexibility in how we can develop services. So something that we're doing with Mental Health Online is trying to map some of those preferences around the choices that people make about forms of communication onto the differences between people, demographic and clinical differences, so we can start thinking about how we can match our mode of communication better to people's individual preferences and profiles. Another area that we have been particularly interested in is thinking about how we can actually use digital technology to enhance traditional models of therapy as well. So what we have have looked at through a number of studies. We have been interested in working with mental health services and seeing about how digital technology can support those. A large program which we ran with a number of services across Victoria looked at the use of a website which service users could access, but could also be accessed within the appointment on tablet computers. And that was a feasible means of structuring interaction and getting, as well as getting content into those. We developed a lot of lived experience-based material as part of that. That's a video material of people talking about their experiences, and use these to structure some of the conversations that practitioners would be having with their workers, and as well as the video material in itself being people saying, "Oh, feeling less alone," feeling that their experiences were more understandable by seeing that material, that by having that different type of material inserted into that practitioner interaction helped people to be able to start conversations, have conversations particularly about recovery that otherwise wouldn't have happened and would have been quite difficult. Another example of the type of work that we've been doing has been looking at virtual reality as a potential means of helping people. What virtual reality offers is a more experiential focus that otherwise might not be present in the room. So one of the common uses of virtual reality is to be able to recreate difficult situations that people may be frightened of, and so that people can practice being in that situation. So that's one of the most common uses. Some of the work that we've been doing, we've also been looking at whether that can be useful for training people in skills. So we've had a program of research looking at the skill of mindfulness, so being in touch with the present experience, which obviously is very widely used in mental health, but for many people is very hard to learn because it involves quite challenging meditation type experiences for people to start off with that. What we've been doing with virtual reality is creating an immersive environment and giving people instructions about tuning into things within their environment with eyes open, and learning to be in the present moment in a different way, kind of as a sort of training wheels for learning mindfulness skills. And so that's a stream of work, and that's also something that we've been able to implement and put out for the public to use on our Mental Health Online website.
Thanks, Neil, for that whirlwind tour of the really important work that's happening here at Swinburne, especially Swinburne's Mental Health Online and the Voices Clinic. I have so many questions to ask you, but given that this is such a topical area, I'm sure our audience will too. For our last segment, we're going to move over to Professor Jim Ogloff, who's going to discuss the Royal Commission's recommendation into the Victorian mental health system. Really important work that's going on there, Jim. It's a great honour to have you here today to speak about these findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Susan. It really is my pleasure to speak. And I'm going to focus primarily on workforce issues arising from the Royal Commission regarding workforce. And just a very, very brief background. As people will be aware, in February 2019, the government established the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. And the commission was led by 4 commissioners. And then there was a support expert advisory group of 8 people, of whom I was one. And that group consisted of one psychiatrist who was the chair, Professor Pat McGorry. I was another academic and psychologist. Then there were others representing mental health nursing, people with lived experience, disability, and a range of other areas. So I certainly don't speak on behalf of the Royal Commission. I'm going to reflect on some of the findings of the Royal Commission with respect to workforce, and then focus primarily on training and work that universities such as Swinburne can do. So very briefly, the workforce obviously lies at the heart of the mental health system. And any mental health system is only as good as the workers it can attract, retain, and develop. And so the Royal Commission did identify that while Victoria enjoys a very committed workforce, there are significant gaps and pressures. And I won't go into all the details, but maybe highlight just the gap in terms of the people coming into the public mental health system, there is a real dearth. So in the present time, it's probably in the order of close to 1,500 people, and that'll increase over time in terms of a gap. And that cuts across all disciplines. Nursing is the primary discipline that's under-resourced, but that includes psychology, psychiatry, and allied health disciplines as well. So the Royal Commission tried to take a sort of an overarching approach and has a number of reforms that are relevant to workforce. But with respect to workforce specifically, they're interested in focusing really on understanding more about the workforce. And so the work government's currently undertaking is really looking at the structure of the workforce and gaps. And of course, the second component really is capability of the workforce, because as we just heard, for example, from both Michelle and Neil, the sort of needs of the population continue to change. We've had to be very adept at addressing things such as loneliness, grieving, fear, and then also using digital platforms as well. So we need a nimble and highly skilled workforce. Now, where we really have difficulty, though, is in terms of recruiting people into the public system as compared to the private system. And of course, there's also significant needs in rural and remote areas around the state across the disciplines. And again, to some extent, that workforce is supported by digital capacity, but still it is the case that people will need face-to-face contact and on-site supports. So with respect to the way forward, again, the Royal Commission tried to take an overarching approach by establishing or making a number of structural changes and establishing entities that can support workforce development. What's been done thus far really is an injection of funding to try to increase the capacity for mental health professionals to obtain placements. And also there's work upfront for scholarship support. And as people may be aware, just yesterday, the Victorian Collaborative Centre in Mental Health received a second reading, the bill to establish that in Parliament. And through that comprehensive centre, there'll be some capacity around training and workforce development. So what's difficult at the time, though, is, of course, that just as we need more supply of mental health, we have really, through COVID, significant pressures on all our universities, Swinburne included. And we have seen around the country a reduction and even elimination of some courses in the mental health professions. And so there really is I think, a difficulty for universities, who are really the entities required to develop the professionals, and the funding and support for them. So I would hope that we would see over time a greater connection between the universities and the need in this particular area. So the final comments I'll make really pertain to some of the specialist areas of training. And the Royal Commission did identify a number of areas, including digital, incidentally, the need for capacity in digital. Also trauma, which speaks to, I think, some of the work Michelle talked about, and my own area really, which is the forensic mental health space, and in particular, the capacity to deal with young people who are either in the criminal justice system or at risk of coming into the criminal justice system, where we see incredibly high rates of mental illness, disability, and social disadvantage. So you can see that the Royal Commission identified a significant range of pressures on the workforce and some structural suggestions around reform that we hope to take into the future with the cooperation of universities and, of course, government as well.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that whirlwind tour as well. I guess I would like to ask you how you think Swinburne and the courses that we can offer can help contribute to some of these recommendations.
Well, in a few ways. I mean, first of all, we have enjoyed for many years a very, very strong clinical psychology program, and we also have a very strong clinical and forensic psychology program, as well as other areas within psychology. But with the pressures on university, there's always difficulty, recruiting and retaining staff who can teach into those courses. And one of the limitations has often been getting placements. So at least we're seeing increased support on government. So the university plays a significant role, but also with our School of Health Sciences, we're seeing growth in occupational therapy, and occupational therapy within the allied health disciplines was the discipline identified as really requiring the most probably growth. Now, occupational therapy, like psychology, is a broad discipline, and there's less focus on mental health in many courses. So that's an area that we could invest in. And then finally, I mentioned, and the Commission mentions, the forensic system, and has in fact injected funds in expanding the forensic mental health system, and there'll be a large growth in that sector and the addition of a youth forensic mental health system. So there's a real need for training, and through the Center for Forensic Behavioral Science, where I work, we do have professional development training and courses for forensic psychiatry, forensic mental health nursing, and broader disciplines. So those are areas we need to continue to invest in and really partner with government around ongoing support for those disciplines and developments. And then finally, professional development, drawing on expertise such as you provide yourself, Susan, but Michelle, Neil, and so many other people in the School of Health Sciences.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. A final question that I think the audience would be really keen to hear your views on is Swinburne University currently has a mission that all students will receive a placement during their education here. How feasible do you think that is going to be within our mental health system and for our mental health courses?
Well, I think in the public mental health system, it's certainly a great opportunity for postgraduate students in psychology and also in other areas, including occupational therapy. I think it's more challenging for undergraduate students because of the nature of the public mental health workforce. But there are lots of non-governmental organizations and agencies that rely on people who can provide support. And so there's opportunities for the university to partner with some of those NGOs to provide opportunities for undergraduate students. And that's very, very important because they need to be introduced into the general mental health working framework. A lot of people I've worked with over the years who are drawn to psychology, my discipline, often when they actually begin to work with people realize it's really not for them. So it's important both for the support of people in community with mental health problems, but also for the development of disciplines to expose people to those opportunities as soon as they can.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. I could sit and ask you questions for a very long time today. It's always a pleasure talking to you. But I think what I will do is draw my questioning to a close and open the questions up to the audience who have been sitting listening to us talk today. So now we will have our question and answer session from the general public, which we will use our online system for. So here we go with the first question. I think that this question is for Michelle. A question has been asked, is there a link between loneliness and mental health problems like depression?
So that's a very good question. So we know that earlier levels of loneliness predicts higher levels of depression in the general community, including older adults, but the reverse is not necessarily true. So depression doesn't always predict loneliness, but more generally, loneliness is really acting as an antecedent to poorer mental health, basically signaling to us there's a lot of potential for us to target loneliness as a preventative approach to poorer mental health.
Thanks, Michelle. I think our next question here is for Neil. So with so many apps available now that claim to help with mental health, are there any apps or platforms that could actually help with anxiety?
Yeah, so I was just saying that one of the challenges we have is that the marketplace has kind of become saturated with health apps. So there's many things that people may be claiming are useful for mental health problems. So it can be difficult to navigate that. One of the things that we are currently doing is working with the Australian government, there's a website called Head to Health, which has links to all of the Australian government supported mental health programs and apps, so to help people to navigate their way better to those apps. That would be our first port of call. So Head to Health, can put it into Google. We're currently working with the government to develop that web platform further. So as well as being a sort of front door for digital mental health provision for problems such as anxiety, which are certainly can be very effectively treated with mental health programs. We run lots of anxiety programs on mental health online, but the Head to Health website will help people to navigate their way not just to digital solutions but also to in-person services, and help people to navigate their way around what can often be quite a confusing mental health system with many different places. So that would be my recommendation for that.
Thanks, Neil. I see we've also got a comment through for Jim. So glad the Royal Commission is strongly acknowledging trauma and the importance of embedding training in this area, and hopefully organisational implementation of trauma-informed care approaches. Is there anything you could touch on there, Jim?
Yeah, I just mentioned very briefly in that presentation that that's certainly one of the areas the Royal Commission focused on, and it underpins some of the discussion Michelle had and Neil as well. And we know the role that trauma plays in development of mental ill health. So there is a concerted effort to try to increase capacity for both mental health professionals and services to try to deal with trauma in a better way, and certainly a trauma-informed way. Rather than re-traumatizing people in the mental health system, it's trying to develop a system that assists people to overcome trauma.
Absolutely, very important. I see another question through from Michelle. Sorry to our audience if I'm not reading these in order, it's just the way that they're coming on my screen. You mentioned loneliness and social isolation. What is the difference? Actually, that's a really good question. And is loneliness more of a problem for our older adults?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, because often they're used interchangeably and often they get mixed up. So we're defining this at the moment, the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, and we see the word social connection as a positive indicator. So it encompasses the structure and function of relationships. So under social connection or disconnection, you have loneliness and social isolation. So loneliness is really about the quality of your connections, and that you feel your relationships at the moment do not meet your current needs. But social isolation is a quantity, very much a much more crude indicator, where you can count the number of people that you talk to. If you are unemployed, you'll be considered more socially isolated. Or if you're living away from an urban area, you'll be considered more socially isolated. In terms of how they're related, there's an overlap, but one doesn't necessarily lead to the other.
Thanks for that, Michelle. I'm definitely going to spread the questions among our expert speakers today. So I've got another one for Neil. Are there particular conditions showing more promise than others in being used for telehealth rather than the traditional one-to-one treatment?
So that's a good question. The state of the literature at the moment is there's areas in which there is better evidence on the basis of there being more studies. So the most studies have actually been done with post-traumatic stress disorder, partly reflecting the way that funding works in the US. So there's a lot of funding from the Veterans Administration. So as a result, there's actually best evidence for a number of sort of cognitive behavioural type approaches for trauma. So like cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, and so on. So they're very well evidenced, and then there's some evidence for a number of problem areas. We haven't got comparative studies at this point that would point to whether there are particular clinical groups or particular groups of people for whom the telehealth would be more or less suited. But what we're kind of interested in doing is looking at perhaps trying to understand preferences more, so that we can deliver according to meeting needs. I think the guidance that I would suggest at the moment is actually thinking about things such as accessibility, and that's probably the primary consideration rather than necessarily the clinical features.
Completely. And another question here in for Jim, is the Royal Commission considering the role of provisional psychologists in providing Medicare and providing services under Medicare?
Yeah, there's two answers to that. First, the Royal Commission really didn't look at Medicare because Medicare is a Commonwealth issue and it was a Royal Commission looking at Victoria's mental health system. But given the shortage in psychology and other disciplines, that has been a primary area of concern, is trying to increase the workforce. And to that end, government recently has developed some programs and funding to mental health services to support trainee psychologists, allied health professionals, and nurses. And among that group are provisional psychologists.
Thanks, Jim. And I think probably we're going to end our session on this question that I'm going to ask all of us because I thought it was a lovely question when it came in. If you had a fairy godmother to grant you one wish, what would you like to see in workplaces in Australia in general to help people support their people's mental health? Michelle, firstly, what would you do?
Right to me. I'm very interested in how people can make meaningful work relationships with each other, and with the onset of remote working, especially us potentially kind of having a hybrid model working for some time, the lack of that physical spaces to interact and those opportunities, as well as new emerging young people, for example, coming into work and needing that mentorship. I think we really need to think a lot about how we can better support meaningful work relationships in order to better support mental health outcomes within the workplaces. And additionally, it is possible to consider looking towards our community for that source of meaningful social connection if we're not able to get that within the workplaces.
Thanks, Michelle. So what about you, Neil? How's your fairy godmother going to solve things for us?
I think that we'd be also looking at cultural change, so that's good, absolutely key. I think we've seen a lot of that happen already with mental health being on the agenda, although it can sometimes feel like it's kind of around particular days of the year or whatever, with particular campaigns and so on. So there being a more persisting culture of it being acceptable to be thinking and talking about mental health within the workplace.
Thanks, Neil. And lucky last, Jim, today. How's your fairy godmother going to work miracles?
Just building on what was said, I think building positive work culture, and one that recognizes the individual needs of employees, including in areas of trauma, family violence, parental leave, other areas where we do need to make accommodation where possible.
Well, there you go. I'm going to bring things to a close because I've been told that we need to finish on time today. I would like to thank all of our speakers for their expert opinions today. The university have asked me to tell you that you will be receiving an email as part of your attendance today. If you have any further questions for any of our speakers or myself or the university in general, you can send them through to that alumni email that you will receive, and we'll do our best to answer them after this session. So thanks very much for your attendance today, and I hope everyone has a pleasant evening. Thank you.